laying down in a foxhole and your foxhole buddy raises his head and gets hit in the head and half of it blown off, you really then realize that just how short our lifespan is and just how fragile we as human beings are. When you give your life for your fellow man and your fellow Marine, that is one of the most courageous things that you could do.
In 1950, United States Marine Corps Captain Carl Sitter received orders to take and hold East Hill at the Chosin Reservoir. Carl Sitter gathered his troops and led the way up the steep, frozen hillside. They came under blistering enemy fire and sustained heavy casualties. When the enemy launched repeated, vicious counterattacks, Sitter somehow dodged enemy fire as he found his way to each position held by his troops, spreading encouragement and demanding they hold ground at all costs.
He inspired us that he knew what he was doing, and as he said, as long as we keep fighting together, we're going to make it all right. We did.
Wounded and fighting off pain, he refused to be evacuated and continued to battle alongside his men. These heroic actions earned Sitter the Medal of Honor.
I was a major stationed down at Quantico, and I received a call from the commanding general to report to his office immediately. Well, as a small major, you don't go to the commanding general's office unless 99 times out of 100 there's something wrong. So I arrived and was given a cup of coffee and told to sit down. I was really treated grand, and I couldn't understand it. The commanding general walked in and said, "Major, 10 days from today, you will receive the Medal of Honor from the President, Harry Truman." Took my breath away. I couldn't believe it. Couldn't believe the action of what I did would rate the Medal of Honor. I didn't think I'd done anything to receive it. It was a great honor, and realizing that many people contributed to it. President Truman, he draped it around my neck and said that he'd rather have the Medal of Honor and be President of the United States. There, you know, you hear that, but that's true.
And he did confess that he was very nervous when he went to the White House to be presented with the Medal of Honor. He would say, "I wear this medal for those that I left behind."
Carl Sitter grew up in the hardest of times, the Depression years. His dad toiled in the steel mills to put food on the table, and on Sundays he would attend church with his family. But it was on the streets of his rough South Side neighborhood that Sitter's leadership skills took hold. These were the skills he would depend on later to save the lives of fellow Marines. After graduating from high school in 1940, Sitter joined the Marine Corps.
Knowing that there were no money for my college education, I leaned towards the service, and my father thought I should go into service. He really wanted me to go in the Navy. He said to make a man out of me, but I got tied up in that Marine Corps suit of blues, travel, romance, and adventure, and went in the Marine Corps.
Sitter enlisted in 1940. In 1941, he was commissioned to second lieutenant.
Carl Sitter, found his niche in the Marine Corps, went on to serve in World War II in the Pacific. Serving on Guam, he found himself in a firefight at one point, and as he rose up to peer over the small embankment he was using for protection, he was shot, and he felt the slam of the bullet into his chest and slumped back down to the ground, and kind of thought in that fraction of a moment, well, I'm dead, it's over. And pretty soon he realized he was still breathing and reached up, and his chest hurt a little bit, and as he ran his hand across it, he could feel cold steel and wet blood. See, he'd always carried a .45 holstered right here on the left side, which just happened to be over his heart, and the enemy round had hit that pistol, saving his life. And so it became Carl Sitter's rabbit's foot. He thereafter, whenever in combat, always wore that .45 pistol on the left side of his uniform over his heart.
For his bravery during the firefight on Guam, Sitter was decorated with the Silver Star. Sitter had become comfortable with his military life, and at the end of World War II, he re-signed with the Corps and was promoted to the rank of captain.
In 1950, men throughout the world learned to look on the brutal face of communism. Berlin, powder keg of Europe, saw a mass demonstration of indoctrinated young Germans on May Day. France was also beset by communist-inspired strife. But there was worse to come. A highly trained and well-equipped North Korean army swarmed across the 38th parallel to attack unprepared South Korean defenders. Caught off guard, they were all but overwhelmed until the United Nations took its historic vote to intervene.
The future of civilization depends on what we do now, and in the months ahead.
This was a time that this happened was in the aftermath of World War II. Just 5 years. People came out of World War II, were on their way to make their $1 million. Everyone I talked to was going to make $1 million there. Some of them stayed in the reserve, and all of a sudden, bango, they were just getting set in the business. Families started to be raised, and they were then called back to active duty to go out into dirty fighting again. I think one of the things that make it unique about the action in Korea, it was the first time that United States forces fought with the United Nations.
Will there be peace or war?
I mean, all this gunfire, the battleships, the cruisers, it was like Normandy. Like 1,000 ships out there. Rocket ships were shooting the beach up, the planes were bombing. And this was going on before we went in Amtrak to the seawall.
With the amphibious assault at Incheon, General MacArthur made a brilliant tactical move by landing behind enemy lines and cutting off the North Korean aggression.
And we came into Incheon to fight the North Korean army. Well, we went right in there and tore a hole through them.
We didn't realize that we walked through part of the North Korean army that was there, and they were afraid of us, and they didn't make any moves until after we got by, and that later on they withdrew to the north. We lost very few people at that time. Later on, the casualties began to rise as we moved on in through Incheon into Seoul there. The fighting in Seoul was very vicious. It was house to house. Sometimes it got into hand-to-hand combat. We had to use tanks at some time to blow the buildings apart. Certain times, a flamethrower to get things accomplished. When you see your Marines being shot from somebody in a building and you don't know exactly what building it is, sometimes you feel to save the lives and of the Marines there that it's better to destroy the building, because the building can always be rebuilt, than to have some of your Marines killed. After the Battle of Seoul was completed, I was given a command of G Company, 3rd Battalion, 1st Marines, and was taken down and put aboard a Queen ship, which was a Japanese manned LST.
Aboard the ship, George Company steamed around the base of the peninsula and then headed across the 38th parallel to the port city of Hungnam in North Korea. Upon arrival, they were assigned to protect the 10th Corps command post, while the rest of the battalion moved further north on the main supply road to Kodo-ri. News back in the States was the war was nearly over.
This was the time that MacArthur was saying the troops will be home by Christmas. And all these Marines thought we were taking the trucks, turning south, go down to the docks, and they would be in San Francisco by Christmas.
Unfortunately, the company received their fateful orders to go north towards the Chosin Reservoir. Despite warnings from the Chinese, MacArthur aggressively pushed further north with the intent of ending the war quickly. The bitter conditions were becoming more and more of a factor.
We were up north in northern Korea, beginning of winter in November of 1950. It was cold. We did not have the proper winter equipment to fight with. We had shoe packs, which were you wore, your feet sweated in them, and due to the harsh snow, cold weather, your feet became cakes of ice. When you're walking with the water jostling in your canteen and it freezes as you're walking along, it gives you an idea of how cold it was. It begins to numb your mind.
It was colder than hell up there to begin with. The ground was so frozen that they had to use dynamite in order to make a foxhole.
I remember our corpsman saying that this thermometer broke at 75 below zero. You can believe that because of the mountainous terrain and the bitter cold and the snow. And it was just the end of the world up there for fighting in that kind of weather.
Weapons would freeze shut. And when your rifle or your carbine freezes shut, that's a tremendous factor. Vehicles, they always had to keep, back in battalion, they always had to keep some vehicle actually running so it could jump start any other vehicle that you had back there. As far as rations and eating, we would take a can of sea rations, put it under our parka and under our jacket just to keep it halfway thawed so that you could eat it.
As the Americans moved further north, the Chinese began to surround them and close the trap.
The Chinese Communist force created a bottleneck that went all the way around the reservoir. The Americans were vastly, vastly outnumbered, completely surrounded, and facing the harshest Korean winter in 100 years.
Sitter's company arrived in Kotori on November 27, 1950.
And our plan is to move along the ridge line, leapfrogging each unit then, and clearing the ridge line and allowing the trucks to move on up towards Hageru and deliver the supplies. It was a beautiful plan. There was only one thing flawed in it, that the Chinese didn't agree with it, and so they put up a very stiff resistance.
It was one constant ambush. There were Chinese soldiers alongside the road shooting at us. They were trying to do anything they could to block the road. And it was a horrific fight to get up to Hageru.
And as we went forward and came along a railroad embankment, came under intense Chinese fire. And I told the people to turn around and shoot out. Like if you remember in the westerns there, protecting the wagon train. I lost 2 people killed and about 3 people wounded at this time. Colonel Drysdale received a message from Colonel Puller stating that you will get through at all costs.
He felt like there was a shield around him, that the Lord had some mission for him to do, that why he kept him alive and all these people around him was being shot down.
I went forward and found Colonel Drysdale. He had been hit, and he turned the command of the column over to me. I then came back and told the troops to put everybody into the trucks, the dead, the wounded, and every one around. We leave nobody behind. And it seemed like it was miles and miles away, and all of a sudden we made around a curve in the road and could see up ahead